Okay, so welcome again everyone to Gemalto's second Ask the Experts webinar for 2016. My name is Ariella Shoham and I am the Senior Director of Marketing for Gemalto's Software Monetization Business Unit, and I will be your host today. For those of you who are new to this program, Ask the Experts is Gemalto's quarterly webinar series where we share industry best practices in the world of software monetization. Today's session, we will look at how cloud and virtualization are expediting the adoption of software-based business models, what this means for intelligent device vendors, and how this is helping them transform from shipping boxes to delivering software-driven value to their customers. With us today, I am very happy to have Amy Konary, Research Vice President of Software Licensing and Provisioning at IDC, and Mark Seery, Senior Director of Strategy and Corporate Development at Juniper Networks. Before we start, I would like to draw your attention to the questions chat window on the webinar control panel. You're all muted, so please feel free to submit your questions anytime throughout the webinar through the chat panel, and I will submit these questions to our speakers at the end of the webinar. We are ready to begin. I'm transferring controls to you, Amy.
Thank you. Ariella, if you could just give me a verbal when you see my screen.
I can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. I will begin. Thanks everyone for joining. It's nice to be talking with you. I'm going to do some context setting and share some trends to help describe how and why we're seeing users from the IT side, from the line of business side, small businesses, enterprises, millions of applications and services and information and content and experiences. So, when we think about some of the things that we'll be discussing in the call today, sometimes you wonder, well, why didn't any of this happen sooner? Or why weren't we thinking about these things 15, 20 years ago in the same way that we're thinking about these things today? Weren't things like customer experience important before? They were, but there was essentially a wall in place, maybe a technological wall that made it really difficult to know even what your customers were doing, what their experience was like with your technology once you essentially threw it over the fence. Unless you had a really, really great relationship with tons of very proactive and honest feedback, it was oftentimes hard to know if your customers were even successful or even using what it is they purchased from you. And that's not the case anymore. And so even just the availability for cloud, for big data and analytics tools, those elements have made it much, much easier today to think about the way that we deliver experiences to customers and business models that support that. So these technological changes are really important, not only because they're changing our lives and how we work and how we interact with each other, but also from an industry perspective, they are responsible for the vast majority of the revenue growth as the overall industry moves from 3.2 trillion to 5.3 trillion. So if your organization does not have a play in the third platform today, you are really missing out on most of the growth in the IT industry. And when I say organization, it doesn't matter if you're a pure technology company or a company that's historically been part of the IT industry. You could be a company that's historically been part of healthcare or historically has been part of oil and gas. These elements are just as important to you as they are to a company that would identify themselves as a software company or a hardware company or a router in the kind of classic information technology sense. To that point about the growth in third platform and technology, we are seeing, and this is a chart that shows many things, the overall trend for information and communications technologies over time, and specifically for software growth by different types of delivery model. I just want to point your attention to one bar on this chart, which is the only thing that's shrinking, which is the red on the very bottom of the chart. And this is software revenue associated with vendors that have less than 1% of their business, their revenue, coming from cloud technologies. And the point that this chart shows is that, while the overall software industry in particular is growing, and not only cloud software but also packaged software, which would be software that sits on premise, continues to be an important part of the overall software opportunity. But if you are a company that does not also have a cloud play, if you are only focused on, let's say, on-premises products, software specifically, your opportunity will shrink over time. And that's something that we see consistently across all different types of software. One of the programs that I'm very much a part of at IDC, in addition to the work that I do in pricing and licensing, is looking at the growth and evolution of cloud applications and cloud services. And we have a worldwide survey that we do every year, almost 12,000 respondents, where we ask them from an adoption perspective what they're planning on doing with cloud, with software as a service. And I just want to show you the massive increase from 2015 to 2016. Many of us have been talking about and thinking about cloud for a long time. I myself launched our software as a service program at IDC back in 2001. So that's a long time, but we saw a lot of companies experimenting with software as a service, with cloud, for maybe one or two applications or workloads, and kind of kept static with that for a while. And what we see from 2015 to 2016 is a 137% increase in the number of organizations using cloud for more than one or two small applications or workloads, and a very small percentage of folks that aren't interested in cloud at all. That still exists for sure. But this really enforces the majority of organizations not only using cloud as part of their overall IT mix, but essentially embracing cloud as a really important part of their strategy. And that's important for companies that are providing services and software and other devices to end customers. The other really important trend that we have been keeping an eye on as well is the role that the line of business customers are playing as far as making technology and spending decisions. And as this data will show here, today's line of business executives are not only tech savvy, but the cloud is really empowering them to make a lot of technology decisions in ways that they may not have made technology decisions before. So being much more front and center, functional areas, and by functional area this could be the human resources department, it could be the customer support organization, it could be the procurement or the supply chain organization. They're becoming more tech savvy, and we're feeling comfortable driving our own IT projects. 60% or so of folks saying that they're seeing that. The link between technology and business results is increasing, and my functional area feels this urgency to implement new technology initiatives, really important to almost half of the folks here, and public cloud services making it easier to access technology, about 40% of respondents. So line of business plays a really important role, and this is important as we start to think about business models as well. It used to be that when you were talking to an enterprise or selling technology, services, software to an enterprise, you were most often talking to someone who did this all the time, does this all the time for their job, they're IT procurement folks, they're used to buying software in the convoluted way that it used to be sold, and now that's not always the case. You're dealing with business people who are, in addition to making these purchases, are not, the IT procurement type folks. They certainly will have a team that will involve some of that expertise, but these folks just want transparency, they want simplicity, they want to know what it's going to cost and how their operating budget may be impacted as a result. So that's really important, and a good segue here to a few of the key business model elements that we are seeing not only emerging, but absolutely front and center of people's expectations today around how they get access to the technology they need to do their job. So the first piece is the ease of access, that I should be able to get at my data, my software, the services that I need to do my job anytime, anywhere, from any device. So mobile support, support over cloud services, really part of people's standard expectations today. There should be flexible pricing models associated with it, models that align the cost more closely with actual consumption, actual experience, or even actual outcome. And so that's also something that's really important, and it goes back to what I kind of alluded to earlier. Being able to better track usage and consumption is something that the cloud has enabled, and that in turn enables these types of models. Self-service and self-provisioning, it's much, much easier to get access to the technology that I need. Line of business users can select, pay for, and access the functionality that they need, and especially those services that might meet a need specific to their business unit and not have a lot of integration needs. Simplicity, consumer-like expectations for ease of acquisition and access. Just tell me what it costs, show me the way that you package it, give me an expectation for how you might discount it based on how I'm going to interact with you, and then present me with this simple but also very informative invoice on a regular basis that allows me to align what I've used, what I've consumed, what value I've gotten with the price that I'm actually paying. And that transparency is really important part of that. So upfront, making it very clear what things will cost and what the different packages are, but also over time making it very clear what I've used, what I've paid for, and the delta between those two where they exist. So, we are seeing an evolution, and this flexibility piece is part of it, not only in the way that people access technology, but also, and use technology, frankly, but also in the way that they view what it is they're getting access to. So if we think about that chart that I showed in the very beginning that showed first platform being kind of mainframe, second, let's think about the second platform specifically, which is very client-server. The idea in that realm, and I think still the idea in many areas today, are that you buy access to a product or service and you essentially get access to an entire toolbox, set of tools, set of modules, or maybe one module at a time. And what you pay, the price that you pay, and ultimately the value that you receive is based on what you're accessing. Am I accessing all of the tools? Am I accessing a combination of tools? Am I accessing one tool or another? And from a technology perspective, what the vendor really has to manage is they have to make sure that the customer gets access only to the tools that they paid for, and that the customer can manage that as well. So if you think about it in the software context, it's not as simple as here's the whole toolbox. It's a bit abstracted because it's software, and so entitlement management plays a really key role in making sure that customers can get access to the stuff that they paid for and use it. And usually these are valued based on what does it cost to buy a saw? What does it cost to buy a wrench? And there's more to it. It's what does it cost to buy a saw if you're this size company in this country at this time of month. But essentially it's upfront and it's defined by what you're going to get. And really the key, what you need to manage as a vendor there are SKUs and product catalogs. So you have many, many vendors that have thousands and thousands and thousands of SKUs, really complex sets of product catalogs on how they bundle and package and put things together. And that is left over oftentimes from this distributed client-server software era where everything was a product or defined by what you accessed, product or service. Software as a service back in the 2001-2000 timeframe and today has really shifted the idea of access to more of experience. What am I going to do with the actual tools that I have access to, who's going to get the tools, how many of the tools are they going to use, and for how long can they use these tools. And it's much more closely aligned with the actual experience of using the tool. If I'm not successful using the wrench, I won't subscribe to the wrench next year. Or maybe there's a different combination of elements I need next year because my needs change, and there's the flexibility when you're pricing based on experience to make adjustments in that way. So the customer value as well as the cost of the product is really defined by interaction. How much do I need, how much do I use, and how do those elements change over time? Subscription fees, of course, support this, and so you need to be able to from a business perspective, support a subscription business model, bill and invoice for subscription, and also do the types of tracking that you would need to do to make sure the customer is getting value over time. Customer lifecycle management becomes paramount because we're not just talking about selling them a saw up front. We're really selling them on the experience of having that saw, having access to that saw to do their jobs over a period of time, and that customer is constantly making a decision, do I want to continue to use that saw, and also that customer is constantly evolving. So being able to manage consumption and meter consumption and usage becomes really important. Now finally, the next step of the evolution that we're seeing from a business model perspective is the idea of measuring on outcomes. So what did I do with the cog and the wrench and the hammer and the saw, and was I ultimately successful based on what I set out to do? And the value there is really created through the interaction of using the tool. So it's not just the experience, did I enjoy using the wrench? Did I feel like I got my work done? It's, did I build that building? And was I building a bicycle? Was I building the Empire State Building? Was I building a shed? All of that is going to impact what my value, the way that I ascribe value to those tools. So you can already probably sense as I'm describing this, you know, there's a ton of flexibility here, but the flexibility also adds some possibility for complexity. And so we see companies mitigating that by having hybrid business model approaches that might have elements of experience and maybe even products and services with an outcome piece attached to it as well. And so it's really important up front as a business, if you're trying to think about how you might price this way, is to define and then also make sure that you can track and measure outcomes and present those back to customers. And depending on what your product or service is, that outcome is going to be different vendor to vendor. Certainly it could be different customer to customer. There are precedents for these types of models in the distributed software area. They were called business value pricing years ago, and this is what we're talking about here is very similar, but it is a you know, kind of the Eureka way, let's say, or the best way of very closely aligning value and cost, and lots of conversations around that today, but certainly not that easy to execute. So the vendor landscape is adapting to all of this. We're obviously going to be hearing from Juniper in this call very shortly. We very much are seeing that not only are customers asking for more flexible business models, more mobile, cloud, social business, big data support from a technology perspective, but vendors are really changing their business models in response to customer needs, competitive needs, but also because that's where the opportunity for growth is. You know, you're seeing organizations create whole new divisions, whole new businesses that are predicated on doing business a different way from a business model perspective, a different way of value. I have a really kind of a simple chart just to really put an exclamation point on the fact that as companies make these transitions, they're and the time that it takes really varies on how successful you are with any one of these three things, as well as you know, how quickly you're able to orient your customers, particularly if you have a large install base around some of these changes. So there are technology, process, and people changes as companies try to shift their businesses to these more flexible business models, more services and cloud-oriented approaches. From a technology perspective, we see companies focused on a few things: entitlement management, billing is a big piece, revenue recognition shifts, and then the ability to more closely manage the customer lifecycle and renewals is another piece. You know, everyone's got a back office that they're trying, that they really at this point in time aren't typically changing, but there are a lot of shortcomings in those systems. They're set up for shipping boxes and product catalogs and SKUs, and they don't always meet the needs of a company that's trying to sell more flexibly based on customer outcomes and customer lifecycle management. So typically people are buying point products or looking at solutions that address these four bullets a little bit better. From a process perspective, companies, you know, it's fairly easy to, let's say, buy in around a new technology, but sometimes changing processes are difficult. Even if technology can enable new processes, you want to make sure you're wrapping these processes around the customer, not around the product, the way that many organizations probably have for many years. And I think the other thing that people oftentimes will get stuck on is replicating a bad process with the technology. We've got this new technology in, but you know what, this is the way that we've always done things, so now we have to figure out how to make this new technology replicate this bad process, and obviously that's something that's going to be difficult to move a company forward when you're doing that. And then the last piece here, the people piece that can be really what slows companies down is cultural and management buy-in. So if you're working within an organization and let's say you're 2 or 3% of revenue today, or maybe that's even optimistic, you're hoping to be 5% of overall revenue within the next few years, unless your CIO, your CFO, your CEO really believes in what you're doing, it's going to be difficult to get the kind of support that you'll need to put the technology in, to make the process changes, to rally people to come join your effort. And that's where I've seen companies tend to spin around. And also, if you don't have the technology in place, the right technology, the people get frustrated or the processes fall apart. So all of these elements can absolutely impact one another. And the scale here on the chart is in terms of months. This is just kind of a rough guideline based on companies that I've spoken to. But let's say it can absolutely take years for these transitions to take place and occur, but they are very important transitions that companies are making, and for many organizations, this is these new flexible business models, cloud services, etc., are really the crux of their growth for the next decade or more. So they're making these hard decisions, and even as they're maybe spinning their wheels in some areas as they try to move forward. So speaking of spinning wheels, I just wanted to leave you with one slide before I turn it over to Mark to talk through what he's seeing from his perspective. This is a snapshot of a street in Stockholm. They made a shift from driving on one side of the road to driving on another side of the opposite side of the road back in the 60s. It was an overnight change. They basically overnight changed all the road signs and closed the roads, and then the next day at 5 a.m. opened all the roads, and everyone came out early in the morning to kind of see what the change was going to look like. And so you can see it looks a little bit chaotic, a lot of people in the road, a lot of cars in the road. This was a big shift, and I think that it's kind of a good image for what we're seeing in not only in, say, software companies or hardware companies, but companies in all different industries, seeing this shift around technologies and new technologies, new customer expectations, new business models that align more closely with experience and outcomes. And these are not easy changes to make. It's unlikely you'll flip a switch and make a change overnight the way that they did here in Stockholm. It probably will be a multi-month, multi-year effort, but rest assured that many companies are also in the midst of transition. We're seeing a lot of best practices and lessons learned emerge, and I think that we all benefit from that and from each other. So with that, I'm going to turn control back over to you, Ariella.
Thank you, Amy. Very interesting and exciting, as you said, and I'm happy to have Mark joining us. Mark, I'm going to now make you the presenter, and you're going to tell us about Juniper's experience.
Okay, thank you very much for that great introduction, Amy. And you can see the screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, great. So a little bit of history about Juniper to start with. So in 2016, we're actually celebrating our 20th birthday. We were founded in 1996. Our first product came to market in 1998, a core router. And since then, we've expanded to have industry-leading solutions in switching security, and while continuing our excellence in routing. We've obviously grown to be a company of 9,000 people, and the TAM that we address has grown from $500 million to around $43 billion. So we've grown significantly over the last 20 years. We have a strategy, a technology strategy of focusing on the best routing, switching, and security offerings, in addition to moving into cloud platforms, which we'll talk about today. But we feel that technology focus in terms of our strategy is connected to a larger mission of connecting everything, empowering everybody. And as a culture, we're very aware of how we enable innovation and progress in all areas of human endeavor across research, across clean energy, healthcare, social networks, education, general commerce, and government. So we feel very connected as a culture to the outcomes for all humanity and all industries that networking produces. We see enormous change happening at the moment, and there are many drivers for that change, all the drivers that Amy talked about. But from a networking lens, we see these 5 drivers as being extremely important. 5G is obviously going to change not only the amount of wireless access bandwidth, but also the basic architecture and infrastructure for wireless networks that will become more virtualized during that transition. The Internet of Things is going to add many more devices to the network world, a lot more information, the velocity, the value, the variety, the volume of data is going to increase incredibly as a result of this change. Cloud is probably one of the biggest changes that's occurring at the moment. The virtualized computing infrastructure that's moving into storage and networking, the DevOps movement, which is changing the basic operational paradigm, and the choices of how to build cloud or experience cloud has a lot of different varieties. There's public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud, telco cloud, which we think is a specific type of cloud that's distinct from other public cloud. And we're also seeing other distributors and other partners getting into cloud platforms. So there's going to be a lot of different ways that software is monetized and a lot of different cloud platforms. Automation is a big vector during this change. A variety of customers and enterprises are seeing a need to get their operational expenses down, and their operational efficiency is very important as part of this journey. And with all this change going on, security is more important than ever, and that's getting end-to-end security right is important for all industries. So what does this mean for us as a company? Well, the explosion of the different types of clouds, the importance of customer experience that Amy talked about, it's really creating an inflection in the business models that the Juniper's customers are exploring. And a result of the business model change that's happening in the buying segment of the industry, that's pushing Juniper to experience its own business model transformation. So like a lot of companies in our industry, we're going from a period of 20 years of the same revenue model and essentially the same business model to a period of enormous change where there's going to be a lot of experimentation, there's going to be a lot of new models. I think it's very hard to say for certain what revenue models our own customers will settle on in the long term, and it's hard to say for certain how long this change is going to go on for. But I would say it's going to be at least 5 years, and it could be forever. Who knows? So I think during this period we need a certain amount of agility in the way we approach business model development, and we certainly have to be very in touch with the business model evolution that's happening in our customer base and our prospective customer base as well. So there's this change in business models in Juniper's own business model and our customers' business model has a lot of qualitative impacts in terms of culture and intent and focus. But from a quantitative perspective, Juniper foresees that its mix of software and services and hardware will change over the next period of this change. So in 2015, software and services was about 30% of total revenue, and we're estimating that by 2019, software and services will grow to be 45% of total revenue. So that's a fairly significant change, and to enable that growth and that mix in revenue, there's a lot of work we have to do behind the scenes and with our customers to achieve that. So how is Juniper responding to this need to change? Juniper has created a company-wide transformation imperative. It's led by the Strategy and Corporate Development organization, and the reason it's led out of that organization is to make sure that it is in fact company-wide, and that as a company we have the ability to align intent with execution. business model change impacts all parts of the company, and that's another reason why it's led out of the strategy and corporate development organization. As a company, we have to create new business models, new revenue models that address software that's embedded in our hardware platforms, software that's being provided on various cloud virtualized infrastructures, as well as offering our own cloud services. And to do that, we have to have offering definition. We have to look at our approach to selling and marketing and partnering in new ways with our partners. We have to put frameworks in place. We have to have new governance and change enablement processes. We have to look at our back-end systems like Amy referred to in her presentation. We have to consider and communicate with various stakeholders about how the P&L is going to change. We have to look at the accounting revenue recognition rules. And of course, licensing is essentially a legal construct. So the legal foundation for all of this is extremely important. So there are many, many changes that transformation drives, but I thought I'd focus on a few just to give some concrete examples of what transformation means to a company like Cisco, like Juniper, and people in our industry. So one of the first things I want to talk about is policy-driven transformation. So when you define a new offering, a new revenue model, a new business model, you can kind of describe it at a very high level, say on a napkin, for example, but you can talk about what's the SKU structure and what's the basic approach to pricing. But, a total company-wide approach to a revenue model or a business model really requires getting cross-functional groups together, talking about what does it mean for support, what does it mean for the sales organization, what does it mean for marketing, and of course the product groups, which are very important in this transformation. And you have to kind of really explore the policy framework that really ultimately describes what the revenue model and what the business model is. And that's a lot of hard work beyond the initial development of the revenue model idea, whether it's perpetual or subscription or usage-based. And then you have to go through a process of repricing products. You have to go through a process of thinking about, what is the offerings you're going to have, how does that tie into the TCO goals you have or TCO comparisons for different revenue models. And that's one of the entanglements and complications of this period of change. As I mentioned before, 20 years where you had one business model and one revenue model, and now you have multiple revenue models. So there has to be coherency of intent and coherency of experience across those revenue models as you go to market and explain to customers, if you take the option of this revenue model, this is the results you get. If you take the option of another revenue model, this is the results you get. And here's how our intent and our pricing and our discounting is coherent across the entire portfolio of revenue and business model options. The other thing that is a really big change, obviously, for hardware companies is the whole concept of gross margin. So in a software business, gross margin is not a very large component. It can be zero or marginal upon how companies think about things like COGS in a software world, but it's certainly not the COGS is certainly not as big in a software model as it is in a hardware model. So you can't rely on COGS and gross margin as a predictor of or determinant of whether a price in a deal is a good deal. You have to look at the larger lifetime value of software and lifetime costs of software to assess whether the pricing is done in the right way. It's a big change for hardware companies. And then there is licensing technology. Licensing technology is a very nuanced situation of trying to balance off the monetization concerns of a buyer and the agile and automated experience of the customer. So that's a journey for both the buyer and the seller, and it evolves over time. But from our perspective, we're really focused on how do we provide self-serve and automated experiences over the long term so that our customers have a great experience with our software and our licensing technology. So lastly, just like to focus on, what are the things that we have to continue to work on over the long term. So there's lots of nuances to revenue models that we discover over time. We obviously identify many of them during planning and development processes, but you go to market and obviously you find things that you didn't expect. When it comes to a perpetual software model, that does encompass change for us as a company, but it is somewhat similar to the existing hardware model. So the change that we have to deal with is not as on the same level as the change you're dealing with subscription and utility models. So there'll be a journey for everybody in our industry of really learning how to develop that ongoing continuous value proposition in subscription and usage-based models that Amy referred to. There will be ongoing work in the area of systems and processes. Juniper will remain an innovation-focused company, and our main differentiation in the marketplace will be through the innovation in our products and services. But systems and processes will obviously take a bigger chunk of mind share in the company because they're going to be enabling these revenue models and business models that we have to deal with going forward. And then there's licensing technology. I think one of the interesting dynamics of the current period of change is there's not one model that kind of fits all environments. I mentioned to you before, there are many different ways to experience a software over many different types of cloud platforms, and each of those cloud platforms have their nuances. There's also differences by customer segment and vertical industry. So as a company, we have to be flexible to those varying requirements as we come across them. And of course, we want to continue to focus on agile efficiency, which is the agility of our customers as well as our efficiency and their own efficiency, because this is such an important part of the total change that the industry is going through. So thank you very much. I'll hand it back for any questions.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm going to look at the questions panel now, so anyone who has questions, please feel free to submit them. Actually, I have one question for Amy. We don't have a very long time to answer questions, so we're probably just going to take a couple. Amy, when you were discussing both software companies and hardware companies, so can you share with us what advantages a hardware company would have when making the transition to a software business model?
Sure. And, I think that oftentimes companies that are making these shifts have a lot of history in doing things a certain way. In the case of software companies, it might be selling a traditional perpetual license. They might have a whole sales force and probably even a channel that's used to selling software that way. When it comes to a lot of the hardware companies that we work with, oftentimes they have had software for many years as part of their overall offering, but it wasn't monetized separately. It wasn't its own product. It was there because it enabled a device or a router or whatever that might be to do what it needed to do. And so the first step is oftentimes to figure out what the value of the software is, to ascribe value to it, and then to try to evangelize that value not only internally or not only externally, but often internally as well. And so I think that, maybe not having established expectations around the value of the software or not ascribing specific value can be both a disadvantage in that you have to go through the effort to try to determine what the value might be, but also an advantage because you're to a certain extent starting with a clean sheet of paper. You don't have sales reps that are used to being compensated for perpetual license in a certain way, let's say, or channel partners that have built their business on perpetual license. Of course, you might have a whole channel that's used to shipping and configuring boxes that you might need to figure out how to mobilize around software, but in some cases you might be able to start really fresh and look at things in a certain perspective and not necessarily be held back from preconceived notions around how your software should be priced and packaged, and a whole install base that's using your software in priced and packaged in a certain way from you. So I think that can be an advantage. The challenge, the extra challenge maybe for a company that doesn't have a history of selling software or services is that many of these organizations do have systems, processes that reinforce kind of the shipping boxes mindset, and so and moving away from that can require a shift in every department to a mindset that evolves around the product to a mindset that instead evolves around the customer. And that's exciting to think about the different ways that companies could start to do that, but in reality it means that a lot of people have to change their mindsets, and a lot of jobs have to change too, and that's not easy to do.
Thank you, Amy. I'm getting more questions. Okay, another one I think for you. How important is it to have end customer data to succeed in the recurring revenue world, so to drive upsell, cross-sell, renewals?
I think it's absolutely instrumental because for a few things. First of all, it allows you to be proactive and prescriptive to your clients and help them see the value out of the service that they've subscribed to demonstrate that back to them with that data. So it's really important for you from a value demonstration perspective, as well as for them from a value recognition perspective. I think it's also very important for you to, again, be proactive to identify problems that may occur down the line. So if you have a client that 6 months into an annual contract has only used a very small percentage of what they have access to, or a very big group of their users hasn't been using the software or the tool, the service regularly at all, that's an opportunity for you to go out and figure out with the customer, why is that? Do you need training? Should you have a different set of services available to you for this group? You know, what has happened there? So it's really important, and you need to be able to scale that process that I'm describing to you. So in order for customer lifecycle management, let's call those set of practices that I just described as part of customer lifecycle management, in order to scale that over the type of install base that you typically want to have for a subscription business to minimize churn and to create those cross-sell, upsell opportunities, it has to be automated. And that goes back to the metering and tracking tools that you need to have. And so I think in the context of cloud services and applications, there's an expectation on the customer side that those tracking and metering does take place. It's a little bit harder if you've got an on-premise product or service to, let's say, retroactively implement metering and tracking that you can also see. For various reasons, the customers might feel uncomfortable with that. But there are approaches that companies are taking with you know, different servers that they might have in the cloud that track some of that information, that you know, data and reports can be pushed out both to the customer and to the vendor. But certainly in the context of cloud services, it's much more straightforward to do that kind of metering and tracking.
Thank you, Amy. Mark, this is a question for you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So Amy's mentioned mindset. I see a few questions here about mindset and about how, and again, since Juniper has gone through this transition or going through this transition, can you share a bit about what you did as a company to help change that mindset, to help sort of go through this transformation, less from a technology perspective, maybe more from a internal, I guess, human resource perspective?
So there's a lot of different aspects to this issue. Certainly, change starts at the top, and the current momentum in change we have started when the current CEO Rami Rahim was the head of the product group, and it continued when he became CEO. And Rami continues to emphasize at every single company meeting the importance of this change, the inflection in the marketplace, and the necessity as a company for us to react and to excel in this period of change and the opportunity for us as a company. So that's obviously a central part of the experience we've had as a company. HR is definitely a partner in this journey. HR is an organization within a lot of different companies that is constantly thinking about culture, and there's a lot of different aspects to culture that our HR department thinks about. But certainly in the area of business model change and software change, and generally speaking change, they're aligned with the software work that I'm involved in understanding that we need a culture of people that embrace and are energized by change, and that's part of the talent development work that goes on in the company.
Thank you. I think we have a minute, one more minute. Okay, I think we're good with our questions. And any other questions who people would like to submit later on, you have the ability to email. I think you have my email through the GoToWebinar panel. Okay, one more question is coming in, but I think we're running out of time, so I will take this offline. And I just want to say thank you for everyone who joined. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you so much, Amy. I found this very interesting, and as I'm sure our audience did as well. So I'll wish you all a great day, to those of you who are ending their day today. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
I know.